Hi everyone, we are talking habits today with our favourite osteo and sports sciences, Dr. Paul Hermann. Hi and welcome.
Thanks.
I'm excited about this podcast because we're discussing habits and why our brains create them and how habits can dictate our behaviours and ultimately our choices. So this has been a really interesting one for me because when you mentioned it a little while ago, I dived into all this reading on habits and listening to podcasts and all this stuff. I'm actually fascinated with how our brain works and how we create habits, and I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I've actually got a lot of really bad habits that I didn't even realize I was doing. So I'm going to start with asking you, what is a habit? Can you explain to us what a habit is?
Sure. Look, I guess to preface this straight up, I'm coming from a practical sense of habits. Not being a neurologist and not being a psychologist, I'm not going to get too deep into the neurology or the neuroscience of habits. But having helped patients, personal training clients, exercise science clients for the last 20 years improve their lifestyles, a big part of that has been identifying some of the habits that they have that may have led to their poor health, musculoskeletal complaints, or the issues that they present to our clinic with. So like you, I've had such a fascination with habits and how they're formed, both, we'll say good and bad, but just curious about how we create these automatic activities or automatic behaviors and how those behaviors then form our life, essentially. Habits are basically a repeated thing that we do so much that it becomes like a groove. And the way I think about it is, if you think of the old school record player, they had grooves in them. And a habit, first time you do something, it doesn't create much of a groove. But after you do it again and again and again and again and again, it creates this groove. And like we know with record players, once the needle's going along a groove, it's very hard to change because it's created like a neural groove. So that's kind of just how I think of it in physical sense, is habits are like grooves that our needle of life essentially runs along. Now, of course, not everything we do all day is a habit. We still have conscious decisions, conscious thoughts, and conscious actions. But habits are the ones that we don't have to think about. The reason we create habits is to basically help us not have to think as much, not to have to make as many active decisions throughout the day. So we have kind of two parts of our brain that function in this way. And the front part, or the prefrontal cortex, is where we make our conscious decisions, where we make our cognitive actions and decisions, like I am going to decide to get up and to go over here, when it's a conscious thought. Whereas a habit, which is deeper in the brain, it's more in the center of the brain, an area called the basal ganglia. This is where I don't make that decision. I don't decide, for example, how I'm going to brush my teeth. I decide to go and brush my teeth, but when I'm there, I'm not thinking about how I move the toothbrush or how I put toothpaste on the toothbrush. Do I brush, if you think about it, did you start brushing your teeth today with the top teeth or the bottom teeth? I bet you can't even remember. And this is a habit. You just did it. You did it. But when you were first doing that habit, it would have been your prefrontal cortex or your conscious thought that made you move the toothbrush in a certain way. You did it so much that now you don't even think about it. And there's so many of those activities throughout the day that we've automated for efficiency so that we don't have to consciously think about it. Driving is the other perfect example, especially if you drive a manual car. Think about all the complexity of driving a car, judging speed, judging distance, whether the car is veering left or right and correcting it with your steering wheel. When you see a red light, you don't think left foot up, left foot on clutch, depress clutch, down gear, lift the clutch, re-engage it. You don't think about all that. You just go through the gears if it's manual, and if it's automatic, you pick your foot up and you probably put it on the brake. Yeah. How much do you push on the? You don't think about it, do you? It's just automatic because you can't do it times. So habits are an essential part of our day to almost free up our prefrontal cortex, or free up that front area of the brain, so that we can automate some activities to allow our brain to be free to have conscious thought about a lot of other things. So it's a great.
Would you say it's more like a survival mechanism for our brain as well? Like
Yeah, look, it is. And it's, again, it's about efficiency. And we even refer to our basal ganglia, or that center part of the brain, as like our primitive brain, because it's, as we've adapted, as we've developed, it's the older part of our brain. So neurologists and neuroscientists will refer to that area as the primitive brain. And then as we've developed, this prefrontal cortex, or the cortex part of the brain, I apologize to all the neurologists who are going to, I'm sure, jump on me for saying the wrong words here, but that's more of our more recent brain, or our development brain. So yes, it is an area that is survival. And I think the way it helps us is to automate some of the things which aren't necessary to continually concentrate on, so that we're free to concentrate on something else. For example, I might automate drinking water or eating, which frees up my brain to be aware of my surroundings in case a predator is coming at me. So I can still be free while I'm eating. I don't think about how many times I chew, and maybe I should a bit more, but it's automated a lot so that I can be free to think about my surroundings and be able to respond accordingly.
That makes a lot of sense, and I honestly understand how our brains are wired that way, and how things become automated and almost unconscious to a certain level, where we get up and we do the things that we do on a daily basis, which is great for good habits, not so great for bad habits.
That's a really important point you make, and I think it's really important here to remember that habits are simply that. They're grooves, neural grooves in our brain that we create, or automations that we create. The brain doesn't discriminate as to whether a habit is good or bad. It's only us that does that. We decide if a habit is good or bad. The brain it's just a habit. So if I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is light up a cigarette because that's my habit, the brain, the basal ganglia is not deciding if that's good or bad. It's just a habit. We decide based on our own opinions, biases, paradigms, and preferences as to whether that habit is good or bad, for us. So a common example would be waking up in the morning, having a cigarette, as opposed to waking up in the morning, having a glass of water.
Yeah.
Society, health-wise, we might decide, well, obviously the water is a healthier choice for our body than a cigarette. But in the brain, they're both habits. Once I've done either of them numerous times, they both become automatic habits.
Well, that's actually really interesting, because that brings me to my next question is how do our habits shape our behaviours? Because you used two really important examples. One is some people wake up and have a cigarette first thing in the morning. Others wake up, put their running shoes on and go for a run. Very different behaviours. I'd imagine the cigarette smoker wouldn't be going for a run after the cigarette, and I can't imagine the runner having a cigarette before going out for a run. So two very different behaviours. So would you say our habits play an important part in our behaviours in general?
Absolutely. How we formulate our habits, and the habits tried to create. Remember, we do make a conscious decision to create habits too. And the ones that we choose to create will dictate how we live our life. If I've got a habit, we're all going through COVID right now, and we're creating these new habits. So every time we enter something, we've created a new habit of using hand sanitizer. Every time, for some people, there's a new habit of washing their hands more often. And there'll be a pattern to which they do that. And if there's a silver lining here, the good take of that is that they'll probably continue those hygiene habits even after, hopefully, COVID has left our society. Our lifestyles are somewhat developed by the types of habits that we create.
So the term creature of habit, or, humans are just creatures of habit, actually makes a lot more sense now, doesn't it?
We all are. Look, my coach and I often talk about humans are inherently lazy. And it sounds harsh. And I think that, to clarify it, we're not inherently lazy. We're inherently trying to always find more efficient ways of doing things. Now, there's this debate that commonly goes on, but if we're just automatic responses to everything, how does that sort of really routines our life and makes it pretty boring and unexciting? And I tend to find the opposite. The people who create really good routines and really good habits tend to have more freedom. because you've created a habit that's kind of made your life more efficient for health, whether that be physical health, spiritual health, financial health, whatever it may be. You're then kind of free to go and make your conscious decisions about how you want to spend the rest of your time. So habits can, definitely develop our lifestyles, and they can be for our benefit or they can be to our detriment.
Okay, well, let's talk about changing some bad habits and perhaps creating new ones, because you said something interesting. Most of the habits that we do, like brushing our teeth, having, drinking, eating, are all things that kind of go unconscious because if it's on autopilot and we just do it, we don't really think about it. However, there are those that we sometimes do think about it. We're conscious. We know that it's not good, or we want to create something better for ourselves. So during COVID, especially right now, there's a lot of people that are either creating bad habits because of the circumstances that they're in, or perhaps some of them are actually going, you know what, I've got more time on my hands. I'm actually going to get into a good exercise routine and are creating good habits. So how do we go about changing? Let's talk about bad habits first, because I've just realized after doing all this research, I've got a lot of bad habits.
Yes,
like, oh my gosh, and that have gone unconscious for a long, long time.
And the important thing is we have free will. So you are the only person that's decided those are bad habits. Now, they may be bad for your health, they may be bad for your lifestyle, bad for relationships, bad for whatever it may be, productivity, work, etc. But the beauty is that you get to decide for your life what's a good habit and what's a bad habit. And different people will make different decisions about that. But again, they're all habits. It is very, very hard. Once the groove is set into a record, it's very hard to change the groove. It's hard to alter it. So all habits, and we look at the researchers here, there's a great book that you and I have talked about a lot, Atomic Habits by James Clear. There's another one, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Oh, yeah, there it is. And there's a lot of research around habits. The general consensus is it's quite hard to change them. Habits will either follow kind of 3 or 4 laws or pathways. And James Clear talks about the 4 laws, cue, craving, response, and reward. Others talk about it in 3. They drop the craving and just have cue, response, reward. And we see this both in humans and in animals that have been tested. So we know that there's this 3 or 4 stage approach to nearly every habit. There's a cue. What is it that makes me go and do that? Then there's a response. There may be a craving between the two, depending on which author you read. And then there's a response to that. So there's a reward to that response. So for example, let's say I get home and I've created a habit when I get home immediately from work of taking off my work clothes and putting on my running clothes and go for a run. The cue is me walking in the door from work. That's my cue. My response, whether I have a craving for the run or not, my automatic response is to put the running clothes on and to go for the run. The reward is how I feel after the run, even if it's tiring, if it's painful, which as you and I have discussed, and most of my personal runs are painful, that's still, you feel that reward for having done it. So my brain then creates a stronger groove that is the pattern. The same process could be the same. The process could be the same as I get home from work, and my cue is to get home. My response is to take my shoes off and sit on my couch and turn on the TV. And my reward is I get to watch whatever the show is that I like, or that I get to switch off. I get to kind of disconnect from conscious thoughts and just let the TV feed me information. So it's the same response: cue, response, reward. We decide what that is. So changing bad habits, to your question, is a matter of identifying the cue to the bad habit, changing the response. We can either alter the cue, we can alter the response, but we have to acknowledge that there will be a cue, a response, and a reward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. Can I ask, does the cue always need to be physical, or can it be a psychological cue? For example, at the moment, there's a lot of, people that are going through anxiety, perhaps because of the circumstances that we find ourselves in Melbourne, second stage lockdown, there's a lot of emotional unrest for a lot of people. Can the cues also be psychological or emotional cues, like people that get angry eat chocolate?
Yep.
Or, so would that also be regarded as a cue?
Yeah, no, they don't have to be physical at all. They can be psychological. So you pointed on a great one there. We're stressed and we eat comfort food. So when I feel stress, my cue, my response is to get the chocolate. My reward is, I love chocolate. It makes me feel good. I get the sugar hit, the dopamine hit, all that kind of stuff. So the cue does not have to be physical. It definitely can be psychological. So in that instance, to change that habit, remember, it's very hard to break them. We tend to try and piggyback them, swap them, or change them rather than break them. Because the reality is we live in the same world. We're going to suffer stress. So the cue is going to be there. I can either try and reduce, change, or manage the cue. And in this case, probably very difficult right now, especially in a lockdown and COVID circumstances. But reality is all life is we're going to have some stress. So how do I change the response? For example, James Clear talks about the law of make obvious if you're trying to create a habit, and make it invisible if you're trying to change it. So in this case, my response is eating the chocolate. He would say the way to strategy change that, make it invisible. Don't have the chocolate in the house. So when I'm stressed at home, if there's no chocolate in a cupboard, I can't just stop. I need to replace it with something. I still need a response to that stress. Yeah. So my response might be, and I've had patients try this, eating a celery stick. And I know people are going to go, oh, that's ridiculous. It's totally up to you what you change.
You're going to substitute Maltesers for celery sticks?
I know, right? No, this is the guy.
Feel good feeling?
It's definitely, it wouldn't be my choice of response change, but it is a valid response change. And then, you could change it for celery stick, but you could also change it for a glass of water. You could change it for doing stretching, or you could change it for some other activity. But you need to make sure that when you change it for an activity, it's always the same. So now the cue becomes a new response. If you change the response every time, you won't recreate that groove. You won't recreate the habit. So you've got to make a conscious decision here of what your new response is going to be and stick to it. If your response to stress is to stretch, and the next day it's to eat celery, and the next day it's to have a glass of water, you're not really creating a new habit, and you'll find that very, very challenging because, again, every time you do it, it has to be then a conscious prefrontal cortex decision. And, we get tired of making lots of decisions every day. We want to automate it so that when I'm stressed, I meditate. When I'm stressed, I stretch, whatever that choice may be. Or I eat a celery stick.
Would you say then having that awareness of what triggers you to go to that bad habit is really important, so that then you can change it? So if you're aware that you've had a bad day at work, and then you're feeling slightly stressed or you're anxious or what have you, and you come home and then you go, you know what? I usually go for a glass of wine because I've had a bad day. I'm actually going to go for the glass of water instead.
Absolutely, yeah. Totally. The awareness is the key of that cue. And there's a great story. I think it was Charles Duhigg who talks about a patient who always smoked a cigarette when they went on a horse ride with a friend. And they did this for years and years and years and years. And then for a decade or so, they didn't ride a horse. And that was the only time they smoked a cigarette, by the way. They weren't addicted to smoking. They weren't a regular smoker. But whenever they went for a horse ride with this friend, they'd smoke a cigarette. And they got into the habit of doing that. And they found, I can't remember if it was more than 10 years later, the patient went for another horse ride with a friend, just happened to catch up with a friend and go for a horse ride, and found themselves really craving and wanting that cigarette, even though they hadn't smoked a cigarette in more than 10 years. But because the cue was still the same, the response was ingrained in the brain. So I guess the two messages here are identify the cue. And if you want to avoid the response, you may choose to avoid the cue or change the cue. Yeah, but at least identifying it will make you prepared mentally that, hey, if I'm going to go for that horse ride, I'm probably going to have a craving for a cigarette. The other message here is habit grooves, they don't age. So although we may not experience the response for this, in this circumstance for that patient, it was more than 10 years, the groove is still there. So when we go back and we experience the same cue, the response will be there. The desired for the response will be there. And it will take a lot of effort to not have that response. For some people, I often hear patients say, I only smoke when I drink. So when I go to have a drink, alcoholic drink, I think about the cigarette. And of course, if they want to quit, if they have a strong enough desire to quit smoking, they want to remove the cue of drinking then and change that cue. And what it might be is they change the cue to a non-alcoholic drink, or they avoid the cue for a period of time, to disassociate. Or when they do drink, they make it, again, like James Clear says, make it invisible. Don't have access to a cigarette in that circumstance. Tell their friends, hey, if I'm having a drink with you, do not give me a cigarette. Don't let me see one. Don't offer me one. And if I ask for one, don't give it to me. Remove the response. Again, these are all strategies, and we've got to acknowledge that they're all difficult. Habits are like I said, they're like neural grooves. They are challenging to break, and they are easier to just swap or alter, or as some researchers say, piggyback.
That's actually a really good one. I guess looking at an environment as well when you're trying to minimize bad habits is, identifying your physical cues if you have any. If you are someone that comes home from work and sits on the couch and watches TV, hide the remote and all that sort of stuff. But I like that strategy that James Clear talks about, piggybacking, in order to create good habits, or if you want to create a good habit, to piggyback it on an existing habit already automatically do. Like, if you want to increase your water intake and you want to have more water in the morning, have your water straight after you brush your teeth.
Yep.
So would you recommend, in terms of creating new habits and more effective way of creating habits, would you recommend that type of strategy where people can kind of go, okay, you know what? These are 5 things that I do really good. What else can I add on to that to create better habits, especially right now?
Absolutely. There's piggybacking is something that we would use with patients every day. It's probably my most common strategy with patients to help them create new habits. And the easy example I give is, I'll be telling patients all the time to add on a stretch or add on an exercise. So we try and find something that they do. Let's say I want a patient to do a stretch twice a day. I'll try and find something that they already do twice a day and join on or piggyback that existing habit. So for a patient, actually, last week I was talking to, he has 2 showers a day. He gets up in the morning, has a shower, and then later on the day after his run, he has another shower. So to him, okay, in the shower, I want you to do a particular stretch. It was a stretch for the chest muscles, so that we associate showering with that stretch. And after a period of time, he will create a habit of every time he has a shower, he'll do that stretch. And then I know at least he's doing the stretch twice a day.
Yeah.
You will, the research says, we used to say habits take 21 days. The most recent research is that it's closer to 60 odd days before you create that new groove, or before it's a little bit less if we're piggybacking because we're jumping on an existing groove that's already created. Yeah. It can be a little bit faster, but we have to, the message here is we have to expect that it will take some time. They're not quick to create, even when we piggyback into an existing habit.
Why is it so easy to create bad habits, yet so difficult to create good habits? Like honestly, that's the whole reason why I did all this habit research. It's like, why is it so easy to fall into bad habits? Is it because we get that instant rush of feeling good or relief, or what you referred to earlier, or is it like, and it's so hard to create good habits?
It's a great question, and I don't know if it actually is easier to create bad habits.
You can't get out when you have a bad habit. Every time you get out, the chocolate's staring, you go, come back, you need me.
Look, I'm sure, again, not being a neurologist or a psychologist, I'm sure there's a significant role to play here, potentially, when we talk about bad habits. You and I are probably talking about sugar and chocolate. And I'm sure there's a role that sugar plays here in terms of strengthening the habit and the endorphin release or that hormonal release, the happy hormones that we get from having that chocolate. But I don't actually know if it's harder to create good habits or bad habits. It's probably just we enjoy the ones that we consider bad more than the ones that we consider good. No one probably, well, depending on the person, you may not enjoy eating a celery stick as much as you like a line of block of chocolate.
How do you as a health professional start to then slowly implement good habits in your clients?
The first and foremost thing that we need to identify when we are trying to change a habit that's not serving us anymore is to identify the trigger or the cue to that response that we don't like. So if the trigger or the cue, for example, is that, no matter how hard I try and implement a walking or a running habit, I get home from work and I get on the couch. Well, we've got to create a new response to the cue. We know the cue might be getting home and taking off the shoes. So let's make something an obvious replacement. Let's put our running gear or walking gear out there in the hallway even, make it obvious, make it almost in our face that when we get home, we take our work shoes off, the running shoes or the walking shoes are right there, so that we change our response to the same cue. The next step I would say is don't try and climb Mount Everest on your first day of walking.
That's so important. That is so important.
We probably set ourselves up, I think, too often for failure by trying to jump too big a hurdle too quickly. And a lot of the research will talk about these 1% wins or micro wins, mini wins. And I think that's really valuable to remember that if I want to create a habit of running, for example, it doesn't mean I have to start with running. I can change the cue that when I get home and I take my work shoes off, I just put my runners or walking shoes on and go outside, go for a walk/jog run, whatever it might be. Don't have the pressure or the preconceived idea that I must run 5K or it's not worth it.
Yeah.
Let's just get out there.
Sorry, Paul. Do you think goals are a good idea? Like setting yourself little goals? I know you've done that with me, with certain exercises and stuff like that. Try and do one, maybe try and do two, maybe try and do three. Do you think like setting small achievable goals is a good way of starting to perhaps break bad habits?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I definitely setting goals. And as you say, setting the SMART goals, make them specific, make them measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. So setting goals based around that 1% win. And I think James talks about the aggregation of micro effects or the summary of micro effects, adding on 1% each time. Was it Einstein was talking about the greatest mathematical equation is compounding kind of thing. We add a little bit on and add a little bit on and add a little bit on. So having your goals, for example, that I want to change my response from sitting on the couch when I get home to becoming a runner. That's a long-term end goal. But having a smaller goal to start with of I want to change from getting on the couch to just going outside and going for a walk and create that habit so that each time I get home, I put on my runners and I go for a walk and have no set determination of how long it has to be for the first week. Just get out there. And then after you've done that for a week, you've created this bit of confidence that, hey, I can do this. And you're starting to alter the groove a little bit. Then second week, you might say, okay, now I want to do the same thing, but I want to make my walk at least 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever it might be that you decide. So that's week 2. Now we're walking 15 minutes every time I change. So my cue is the same. My response is still getting out there for a walk, but I've made it a 15-minute walk. Week 3, I might make it 20, 25, 30, slowly increase the distance. And only then when I've created this habit, I might go, well, when I'm out there, I might make some of it a bit of a jog and walk at some, jog some, but don't have a preconceived idea that it has to be 50% walk and 50% jog. Just for the first week, when we're altering the response slightly, be kind to ourselves and go, the fact that we're out there, the fact that we're walking, the fact that we've changed the response and got off the couch is the win. So
consistency.
Sorry?
and the consistency.
Yes, yeah, because the response is still the same cue. 5 nights a week, we get home from work. 5 nights a week, we're out there, and and even then, be a bit kind and go, well, if I'm out there 3 out of 5, that's still a win. If 2 nights are horrible weather or for whatever reason I can't, let's not beat ourselves up that it has to be all or nothing. So there's some great researchers, Di Clemente and Prochaska, who you and I have spoken about before.
Yeah.
They came up with this model of behavioural change back in 1983. And the difference it had to a lot of other behavioural change models was that it was circular in nature and not linear. And you probably heard the phrase, falling off the bandwagon.
Yeah.
And that's because we have this notion that something travels from origin to destination, and it travels in that same pathway. Even if it's a curvy pathway, it travels. And if we fall off the bandwagon, we're off the pathway. And it's kind of like, oh, look, I've started having a bit of chocolate, so I may as well eat the whole damn block.
Well, that's
a little
what? It's like, well, I can't stop at one. I'm either all or nothing. It's not. You just take it away from me. Don't give it to me. I'm like very conscious of my environment right now.
Remove the stimulus, remove the response, the chocolate. Yeah. So, for example, someone who hasn't been drinking alcohol for a long time and then has a drink, they don't, falling off the bandwagon would sort of indicate they didn't just have a glass, they got drunk and they had several. Whereas this model of behavioural change from Di Clemente and Prochaska talks about relapse as being completely normal, and it's this cycle. So we start with this sort of predetermination phase, and then we get to this determination or preparation phase, then we get to an action phase, then we get to a maintenance phase, and then we get to a relapse, and relapse is considered completely normal. And then we go back to predetermination, or this kind of conscious awareness of wanting to change our habit. So that way, when we think about relapse, we don't think of it as being falling off the pathway. We think of it as being just a completely normal cycle, normal stage in our cycle of change. It's part of the pathway, exactly. And that removes the guilt or the shame that we feel about letting ourselves down, or having that cigarette, or having that drink, or having that bit of chocolate. And as we know, especially with things like behaviors that we deem are bad, when we have a bit of shame and guilt, we tend to just do them more. So we have more of the chocolate, we have another cigarette, to hell with it, and we go crazy and have the whole block of chocolate. Whereas when we consider relapse as a normal phase or a normal stage of change, it's like, I had a bit of chocolate, but then I just got straight back on the cycle and back on my focus and continued on my journey of change. So that way, if I have a day, 2, 3, where I'm not outside doing that walk that we talked about, that's okay. It doesn't mean I stop altogether. It just means I reassess, refocus, and try and get back out there the next day.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. And James Cleary's mentioned a really awesome exercise. Do something for 2 minutes only, but do it consistently. Only do it for 2 minutes if you're trying to create a good habit. Now, I'm using walking as an example. If you're someone that doesn't exercise, go outside for 2 minutes, 2 minutes only. After about a week or 2 weeks, you find, or the subjects that he was talking about found that they were actually, walking for longer or spending more time at the gym, because they figured, well, I'm here now, I may as well, do a 10-minute workout or half an hour workout. And before they knew it, they finally got into this habit of working out and doing what have you. But I guess one of the things that he spoke about is that consistency. And if you do get off the bandwagon, it's okay, jump back on it the next day.
Yep, absolutely. Normalizing that relapse rather than considering it failure. Yeah, totally.
I think that's key. I think actually understanding that it's not a failure, but it is part of creating better habits or a better lifestyle for yourself. It is part of that journey and part of evolving.
Absolutely, yeah. So we try and focus on this, the biopsychosocial approach of wins. So looking at the positive win rather than the gap that's missing. And the example I give is exactly as you were saying. I've had patients say before, look, I feel silly because I spend 25 minutes getting dressed, changing my clothes, putting on my compressions and my Lululemon gear and whatever it might be, and my sneakers, but they only go for a 5-minute walk. And they go, I feel silly. I'm like, no, because you had 30 minutes of healthy behavioral change. Even if 25 minutes of it was preparing and 5 minutes of it was walking, you altered sitting on the couch to a positive, healthy choice that you're trying to make. So we should never diminish the efforts that go into achieving the result. Not just the 5 minutes of walking, but the preparation that they did to get that 5 minutes of walking. Or if it's someone who's trying to join the gym, the time they put into researching which gym, etc., is all part of that winning, part of that change that we're looking for, because the alternative is we could be on the couch.
True.
Every step towards making that positive change, no matter how big the step is a win.
Yeah. And I think that's key, is actually understanding that the whole process is a positive one, and it's a positive one in either creating better habits or breaking bad ones. It doesn't really matter, because the entire process is part of behavioral change.
Yes. And that's you mentioned it just then, behavioral change. And it even helps to try and remove the stigma of good and bad, and just think, what are the habits we want to change? What are the behaviors we want to change? They may not necessarily be good or bad deemed by other people, but it's for us. It's for our happiness, our health, our relationships, our productivity, all those things that we're trying to improve potentially, to just think about, well, what is it that I want to change in my behavior and adapt my habits accordingly.
Before we go, I actually want to ask you about one more, which I think is a super awesome strategy, which is the accountability one. Having someone accountable for you not to eat chocolate. I know you like chocolate, and I like chocolate. So are we going to break this habit? We're going to break this habit. I'm going to hold you accountable. Although I know your birthday's around this time, so I'll let you go until after your birthday, because that would be really tragic.
Thank you. I feel very blessed that I'm allowed to have my chocolate on my birthday. That's my given. And I love the fact that I have 362 birthdays a year. It's a great thing. Look, there was a lot of different strategies to how we create new habits, or how we create new behaviors. And you mentioned the accountability strategy. We talked about the piggyback strategy before. Accountability is a really powerful one. The example is that when you make a commitment to change public, you'll see people put it on social media, or when you tell somebody, it's like it makes it more real. It makes it more tangible, and you've almost put it out there as I'm not thinking about it anymore, I'm going to do this. And by telling people, we know that the research shows that we are more likely to follow through. By having someone or something that we report to, another accountability partner can be, for example, a tracking device. It doesn't have to be a person, and it doesn't have to be a public forum that we announce it to the entire Facebook world, for example. So having a person that you account to, let's say at the moment I'm trying to increase the frequency of my running. So I've joined Fred's Big Run for August, which is the Fred Hollows Foundation that does amazing work at restoring sight to blind people in developing countries. And they're doing a run in August where you pick a distance and you almost commit to running that distance in the month. Doesn't matter whether you do it over every single day or whether you do it over 2 runs, but in the month you try and achieve that distance. And I've got a friend who's doing this who put me onto it, and we're sort of reporting to each other after every few runs. So we have an accountability partner. So I've got an accountability partner who's a person that I report to. And what I really love is, what motivates me, when I get back from a run, I put it into the tally. There's a fitness tally there, which then shows me how many kilometers I'm up to. And I think I'm only up to about 19 kilometers so far. And what are we into, the 10th of August, 11th of August today, I'm about 19, towards my goal of 50 kilometers. So I'm probably on track. But for me, it's that accountability that I come home, I can message my friend, and if I don't, in a few days, they'll message me and go, hey, how's your run going? So I want to be able to report, yes, I've done 2 more runs. And I've also got a tally that I can add it into that gives me this nice positive feedback that, oh, you're up to 19 kilometers now, 31 to go. So those factors, whether they be a thing or a person, we do know the research really supports making it accountable to someone else.
And also making it visual. I think that's the other important thing. There was an example in the book about a guy that would go into his office every day and he'd have 100 or 150 paper clips. And every time he did a call for a sale, he'd put a paper clip in the jar. And he wouldn't stop until all 150 were in the jar. I think creating a visual is very similar to accountability. You just said it yourself. When you see the tally, you go, oh, okay, I'm up to 19 Ks. Maybe this week I'll do an extra 3 Ks and see if I can hit that target a bit sooner. I know with me, visuals work. So I think that's a really powerful and a good one. It's a positive one too.
Yeah, and we've seen it, when you're trying to save for something, having a saving goal where you put it on the wall and you colour in the bit of the thermometer that I'm getting towards my goal, and it motivates you to keep working towards that. The productivity experts always say, that which is measured improves. So, having a measurement on something and being able to, again, it is almost like a type of accountability, isn't it? That you're reporting to a thing on the wall, or you're reporting to a spreadsheet, or you're reporting to the paperclip into the jar. You're being accountable to that. It's almost like you're accountable to yourself, or being accountable to yourself. Yeah. Definitely helps having using that strategy, but it's also, you've got to find the strategy that works for you.
Yes, that's important.
It's this one. For some people, it's piggybacking. It's really about what works for you.
Because we're all different, and our habits are as individual as we are, aren't they? And what may work for you may not work for me. And I agree. I think you've got to find something that's easy, something that you can stick to, and something that you enjoy. And makes you feel good when you accomplish it, regardless whether you want to change a bad habit or create a new one. I think you feel good about it.
Totally, and I totally agree that the strategy, if it doesn't work, doesn't make you a failure. It just means you picked the wrong strategy.
I'll try again.
You didn't fail. You just, okay, that strategy doesn't work for me. The accountability one doesn't work. I'm going to try the 1% strategy, or I'm going to try the piggyback strategy. Just try a different strategy until you find the one that works for you.
In other words, find a chocolate that you don't like.
Or it's simply don't have the strategy of invisibility. Invert those 3 or 4 laws of habit change. If we want to make a habit, to bring on a habit or to create a habit, making it really visible. And James talks about that fantastic example. He used to buy, was it James or Charles? I can't remember. They bought lots of apples and put them in the crisper in the fridge. And every time they'd go to the crisper, the apples have gone bad because they were out of sight. So they changed it to put the apples into a big fruit bowl in the middle of the dining room table, and found they were eating apples because they were there, they were visible. So it was an easier way to create the habit by making it visible. The inverse works as well. If I want to avoid having the chocolate, if it's not in the cupboard, I can't have it. I'm less likely to create another cue. If I get home, or if I'm tired or I'm stressed, whatever the cue may be that makes me go for the chocolate, I'm less likely to create another one by going, oh, it's not in the cupboard. I'll drive down to 7-Eleven or to my local shop to buy chocolate. So if it's invisible, less likely to follow through on that perceived bad habit as well.
So make the ones that aren't serving you more invisible. Make the ones that you do want to create more visible or easier to get to, so that become automated. I think we've pretty much covered it.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Hey, hope you guys enjoyed part 1 of our Habit podcast with Dr. Paul Hermann. Stay tuned for part 2, where we talk about the motivation behind creating good habits. For more on Paul and his clinic, head to www.staytuned.com.au. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.